So hello, I'm Mandy Pattullo. I'm part of the Textile Study Group and I'm pleased to be exhibiting at this year's Festival of Quilts in the Textile Study Group's Insights exhibition. I'm going to talk about the three pieces of work that I have in the exhibition and what they mean to me. They're entitled Home, Family and Work, and they're very much about the experience of the last year during lockdown and reflecting on the things that are really important to me in my art practice and the rest of my life. I'm going to just walk across and talk about the first piece, which is called Home. All of the three pieces based or sewn onto scraps of old North Country quilt. I practice I have my studio in Northumberland, and there's a very strong quilt making history in the northeast, so I use a lot of old quilts in my work, and it's quite important to me to refer to that sort of local vernacular tradition. So I source very old quilts and then I embellish them with stitch and further collage. So this home piece, this isn't my house, I wish I lived in a nice house like this, but home is very important to me. This is about a journey I make nearly every day from my home to my allotment. So walk through the garden, I walk through a cemetery, which is where the crosses come in, and then I walk past the community orchard and the apple trees and through to my allotment. I spend a lot of time watering. Bees are very important to me, so that's the piece about home. This piece is about my family. It needs a little bit of further work because I have another grandchild to add to this list, which will be fun to do. So this is me as a queen and my husband as a king, because we're in charge and we're sort of now the senior members of our family. And there's little things that are important to me here. So the year that I got married, it's very important to me that we sit round a table to eat. That's reflected in the embroidery here and the initials of my children and grandchildren. And then this one is about my work. So I'll just talk about why I've chosen to work in cross stitch, which is not typical of my style. So my mother has fairly recently gone into a care home and did cross stitch all of her life, and I inherited her cross stitch books and a lot of her cross stitch stitches, kits that she's bought at places like the Festival of Quilt, most of them unopened, which a lot of you will identify with. And I always despised cross stitch a little bit. I didn't really take it that seriously. But when she was unable to do it and I inherited her stuff, I started to look more carefully at it and actually took some of the patterns from her cross stitch books and started to mix them up with my own work and my own collage style. So that's why I've chosen mostly to work in cross stitch. So it's a marrying of my mother's textile tradition and mine. So the work one here was, this horse was taken from one of her books. She feels I don't do cross stitch properly because I just have no grid, my stitches are slightly uneven, and I don't finish things off completely, and I intentionally do that a little bit to annoy her, but also because I just think they're more interesting for being unfinished. So my studio is in a place called Horsley, and it actually happens to be a place where there are a lot of livery stables. So outside my studio window I can see horses. This is about my sewing and the quiet times I have in my studio. And this piece of technology, which is my iPhone, is so important to me. So all day long I listen to podcasts as I sew and listen to music. So the three pieces really are about my life, and I'm very proud to be part of this exhibition and sharing my work with the general public, but also being part of a group of artists that have such a high skill level.
Hello, I'm Ruth Issue, and this is some work that I've done towards the Insights project. So I particularly am interested in colour and colour relationships. I do a lot of dyeing, I'm a printer, I'm a dyer, and I'm also a stitcher. But my main interest is about the quality of the colour in relation to the different fabrics and how you can layer it up and make it into a really lovely, exciting explosive area of colour. These pieces were related to the view from my studio in Shropshire, where from the studio I look east and I look towards often the oilseed drape of the fields in the distance and the dark, rather menacing skies which are reflected with the sunlight from the west. I suppose it's about the different qualities that you can get by layering transparent and opaque materials together, and then just being able to take, in this case, an insight into a minimal area. So I love some of the details of little areas which you can focus into. This piece is interesting because it came as a result of the previous pieces. And when you finish off a piece, you often trim the edges. And in trimming the edges, there are often lovely little gems of collections of little frayed edges. And so you start to keep them. And when I had finished the other pieces, I then put together these to make a different landscape. So it's almost like, again, looking over the horizon, but different things happening and building in bigger slabs of colour. And often, actually, the leftover bits often make the more exciting pieces because they're the bits that are scattered and you suddenly think, oh, that is gorgeous. So, although I wouldn't say I actually design it as such, there's a lot of experimentation and playing, and the designing happens when you start moving the materials together and then how you're going to put it together as a final piece.
My name's Alice Fox and I'm a member of the Textile Study Group, and I'm an artist working with materials that are all from my allotment plot. So I grow materials and I use the materials that I found there, found objects. So the work that I've got in the exhibition here is using plant materials like bramble and nettle fibre and dandelion stems, and so things that I've grown and things that I've processed from there. So the materials that I've got here are flax. I grow flax and process it into linen, so I spin that. I've got nettle that's also spun. I've got sweet corn fibre. I've got cordage that I've made from dandelion stems, daffodil leaves, leek. I've got bramble fibre here as well. And then I've got the piece here that's a found object. It's a tool, it's an old trowel that I found on the allotment, and I've looped into that, so the cordage is twisted by hand, and then I create a vessel or an object or a form using looping. They're essentially very basic old techniques, so I am weaving, but it's also looping and twining, and I use a lot of techniques from basketry, from soft basketry, but I'm not really a basket maker. My background is in textiles, but I'm using the materials that are available to me, and playing and exploring with those in quite an intuitive way, responding to the materials themselves. This is braided dandelion stems that are then coiled and to form a vessel round the pebble. So this one is made from newspaper that I found in the shed. So I've twisted cordage from strips of newspaper, and then they're looped to form the kind of encasing for the stone. This one is made from bindweed, so it's been woven a kind of random weave, again using the stone as a kind of starting point.
Hi, I'm Jane McKeating and I'm a textile artist. I do a mixture of hand stitch and printed textiles, and most of the ideas and the images come from drawing, which I spend a lot of time doing. So the piece that I've been doing and bringing here today has been a mixture of waterless lithography, which is what I've been doing in the printmaking studio, and hand stitch. And what I like is the strange mixture that you get in the mark making between the stitch line and the printed line. So this central panel is an image that I drew of these two women sitting having coffee in a park during the lockdown, and they were chatting away to themselves. But I like to think about all the things that they might be thinking and might be saying, the sort of secret world inside their heads. And so all the images around the outside are of all the sort of stories and things that might have been going on. And so I've been quite playful with the imagery, thinking about funny little aspects and stories of ways they might be thinking, their kind of interior world. And so I've enjoyed experimenting with the marks and the colours and the images, and then sort of presenting them as a way you could kind of walk around, so that it's multi-directional. And I really like the way that the stitch and the print begin to integrate, and so you can't quite tell what's printed, what's stitched, and that you've got this kind of multi-layer. And then using some of the very shiny threads, you get a really nice shiny reflective surface of some of these ones, which work interestingly against the very matte surface of the print.
My name is Janet Edmonds, and I'm a textile artist. Originally I worked with clay, so most of my work is three-dimensional. These pieces, this was something I found on the beach. It was a branch of a plant with all the soft matter had disappeared because it had been tossed around in the sea, and it was very, very beautiful and very delicate looking, and I was inspired to make these pieces, which I've used crochet, because crochet you can go round and round and not to have a seam to deal with, and it had some very beautiful markings on the outside, so I've responded with these circles. This piece was based on barnacles, again on the beach, and it was a metal rail completely encrusted with barnacles. And I chose not to use much colour because I like the idea that they're faded, because they've been on the beach and they've been subjected to the weather and the water and being tossed around the sand.
Hello, I'm Penny Burnfield. I'm a textile artist, but I'm also a gardener. So it seemed important that I should find a way of bringing the two together. So over the last year or so I've been experimenting in different ways of exploring the garden. Some of my work here is ceramics, which is something I'm not particularly adept at, but I like playing with. And I've explored some of the patterns and shapes in the garden with that. I've also started making collages. And I've included my sketchbook because I wanted to show that sketchbooks don't have to just be about drawing, they can be about exploring ideas through writing. And for me that actually works far better than drawing. The final part of this is these 4 samples here. I wanted to use existing materials because that seemed in tune with the ecological approach to the garden. So I've used some dyed green organza, which I had from a previous project, and I've explored different ways of adding colour. Machine embroidery, wrapping, and then another form of wrapping using some silk samples which go back over 20 years now. So that's the story of my work.
My name is Sarah Burgess. I trained as an embroiderer, and I still work with textiles, but I like to incorporate printing with my work a lot, and I frequently work with paper as well, so there's a bit of a crossover there. This is a piece of my work. This is Waving or Drowning. It's inspired by a visit I made to the east coast of Norfolk, where I went to research, specifically to research rising sea levels and the effect on the coastline of Norfolk. And I went to Hemsby, which is a place, an area there that's having particular problems. They've had to demolish quite a few houses, and the settlement is moving back from the coast. There are very unstable sand dunes and all the rest of it. I've worked previously with the theme of rising sea levels, and used a vest within that, sort of drowning the vest from the bottom up. But this time I wanted to take it a stage further. So I've got 2 layers here. We have the shadowy printed vest behind, and then we've got the dyed stitched vest on top. And some of the items that I've included on the vest are inspired by items that I found amongst the sand dunes where the houses had been demolished at Hemsby. This was a little very intricate picture frame with no picture in it, which was particularly poignant because I don't know who lived in the house that had been demolished there. And there was a cup and a toothbrush and various things. I worked for a number of years incorporating ceramic shards into my work, and this was an opportunity to do that again because I found pot shards amongst the sand dunes again. And so the idea is that we've got one layer moving against another. It's intentionally not flat. The top layer is intentionally not flat. The idea is that there's a feeling of movement within the piece, that water is coming up, and that the items are being drowned in water and silt down at the bottom. So I frequently attach the shards with thread in this way, lacing over the top to hold them down in an informal way. But in this case I've used a bit of gold thread because I wanted to introduce a little bit more colour into my work. Yes, this is another piece of my work, detritus, and I live in the Peak District of Derbyshire, but in a town that used to have a lot of hydropathic institutions. So people came out to take the water, very often for water treatment, and have a holiday for health reasons. The big hydros there have all gone, but when they closed, all the rubbish from the hydros was burnt and then dumped, lost in the rubbish tips and buried in silt. Now, I have a stream that runs round the edge of my garden, and the stream and the water running through the tip washes them out into the stream, and I occasionally find the cup handles along with other ceramic shards as well. But I'm particularly fascinated by the cup handles, the thought that somebody picked them up, somebody held them, had a cup of tea. They seem to speak of a bygone time. They were lost in the silt. Many of them have taken on a patina from the minerals in the earth. I particularly like the white ones because they take on different tones depending how long they were buried for. So they were lost, they were broken, they were lost, they were buried, and then they were rediscovered in a new time and a new place and given a different meaning by me. So I bury them again, or start to bury them again in stitch. Every time I find another cup handle, I'll do another piece. We've got 26 at the moment. Some are buried quite deeply, others much less so. So it's a lacing process really. But I like to feel I'm reburying the cup handle. Or maybe it's emerging.
Hi, my name is Lois Blackburn. I'm an artist. This is my quilt, Blood, Sweat and Tears, the menopause quilt. Each of these items symbolises a different symptom and some treatments as well. With this piece there is a swirling stitching on the background, and I think this for me symbolises that swirling confusion of menopause. I've used silk for this quilt, which not only absorbs the colours and reflects the colours back beautifully, it's also a really tactile and warm fabric, and that felt important as well, that this was a quilt that you could wrap yourself, envelop yourself in times of stress, in times of trauma. And for a lot of women, they talk actually about the trauma of menopause, so I wanted something comforting. For me, actually, on a personal level, is the act of making this has really supported me through my own perimenopause time. It works on two levels. One, which is the research element to find out how other women are coping and suggestions on how to treat the menopause. But then the other thing is just the act of making, keeping your hands busy, doing something creative, and feeling that I might be able to support other women going through a similar thing by creating an artwork which invites people to have conversations. So it's been a very important thing for me, and I would highly recommend to anyone going through the menopause to do creative artwork, whether that is making a cake, flower arranging, or creating a quilt.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, you're welcome.